The Forgotten Ritual of Holi. The Invitation. Rajiv had always been fascinated by old traditions, especially those that had been lost to time. As a journalist specializing in forgotten folklore, he had traveled to remote corners of India, uncovering eerie stories buried in history. When he received a mysterious letter from an unknown sender, inviting him to a village named Rangpur, a place where Holi was never celebrated, his curiosity was instantly piqued. The letter was brief. If you seek the truth behind lost traditions, come to Rangpur before Holi. But remember, some things are meant to stay forgotten. Intrigued, Rajiv set out on his journey with his close friend and photographer, Arjun. The road to Rangpur was long and winding, leading them deep into the countryside where modernity had barely touched the land. The village itself was small, surrounded by dense forests and shrouded in an eerie silence. As they entered, they noticed something unsettling. There were no decorations, no laughter, no signs of holy preparations. The villagers watched them with wary eyes, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. An elderly man, who introduced himself as Pandit Dinanath, approached them. His voice was firm yet filled with caution. "Why have you come here, outsiders? This village does not welcome Holi." Rajiv explained his purpose, but the old man only shook his head. Some stories should never be told. Despite the warnings, Rajiv and Arjun were determined to uncover the truth. That night, they lodged at a small guest house run by a woman named Uma, who seemed hesitant but hospitable. As they sat by the dimly lit lantern, she finally whispered, "The colors bring them back. If you value your lives, leave before Holi." Rajiv's curiosity deepened. Who were they? What was the village hiding? The next day, as they roamed the village, Arjun discovered an old, abandoned temple at the edge of Rangpur. Inside, the walls were covered in faded murals, scenes of a holy celebration unlike any they had seen before. But at the center of the temple lay something chilling. A pile of broken clay pots, filled with dried, blackened colors. As Rajiv touched the darkened powder, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the temple. A whisper echoed in his ears. "You should not have come." A strange sensation washed over him, and when he turned to Arjun, his friend's face was pale. "Rajiv, I think we just made a mistake." The cursed festival. The night after their visit to the abandoned temple was restless. Rajiv kept hearing faint whispers like distant voices carried by the wind. Shadows seemed to move unnaturally outside their window, and the air felt heavier, as if something unseen was watching them. At dawn, Rajiv and Arjun sought out Pandit Dinanath, determined to know the truth. The old man hesitated at first, but finally agreed to tell them the cursed history of Rangpur. "Holi was once celebrated here with joy, just like everywhere else," he began, his voice low. "But one fateful year, everything changed. Many decades ago, Rangpur was ruled by a cruel landlord named Thakur Virendra Singh, who treated the villagers like his property. He had a beautiful daughter, Meera, who was loved by all. Meera was kind-hearted and often played Holi with the villagers, defying her father's orders. She had fallen in love with a young man from the village, Raghav, and they planned to run away together during Holi. When Thakur found out, his fury knew no bounds. On the eve of Holi, he ordered his men to capture Raghav and Meera. In a horrifying act of vengeance, he had Raghav publicly executed, his body tied to a wooden pole and burned in front of the entire village. Meera, witnessing the brutal murder of her love, cursed the village with her dying breath before leaping into the flames. Her words still haunted the villagers. "From this day forth, the colors of Holi shall bring forth the souls of the forsaken. Those who dare to play shall dance with the dead." The next Holi, the village experienced something unnatural. The moment the colors were thrown, horrific shadows emerged, twisted, decayed figures of the dead, their hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. The ghosts of Meera, Raghav, and others who had suffered under the Thakur's rule rose from the ashes and danced through the village, dragging anyone who dared to celebrate into their cursed revelry. Terrified, the villagers abandoned Holi forever. Any attempt to revive it resulted in unexplainable deaths and disappearances. The temple where the last Holi had taken place was sealed, the colors left untouched, blackened over time by something unnatural. Pandit Dinanath stared at Rajiv and Arjun, his eyes filled with fear. "You entered the temple, didn't you? You touched the colors?" Rajiv felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He nodded slowly. The old man's face turned pale. Then it has already begun. They know you are here. At that moment, a sudden gust of wind howled through the village. Distant whispers grew louder, turning into laughter, twisted, echoing through the empty streets. And then, for the first time in decades, colors began to fall from the sky. The dance of the dead. The sky above Rangpur darkened unnaturally, and colors, red, blue, green, and yellow, began to fall like ash. But these were not ordinary colors. They were tainted, fading into black the moment they touched the ground. A deep, bone-chilling laughter echoed through the village. Pandit Dinanath's face was pale with terror. You have awakened them. It is too late. Rajiv and Arjun stood frozen as the streets of Rangpur changed before their eyes. The old houses seemed distorted, their walls shifting like breathing lungs. The air grew thick with an unbearable stench, the smell of burning flesh. Then, from the darkness they emerged. Figures, dressed in torn festival clothes, drenched in dry blood and soot, stepped into the streets. Their eyes were hollow pits, their faces twisted in eternal agony. Some had no faces at all, only blank, featureless voids. At the center of it all stood Mira. She was beautiful, but her face was smeared with streaks of blackened color, and her eyes glowed an unnatural white. In one hand, she held a burnt handful of powdered color, letting it slip through her fingers like sand. She looked directly at Rajiv. The festival must continue. Suddenly, music began to play. It was the sound of Holi, the joyous beats of drums and flutes, but warped, distorted. The spirits began to dance, their bodies jerking unnaturally as if they were puppets on invisible strings. Arjun screamed as his body lifted into the air against his will, his limbs moving in sync with the undead dancers. He thrashed, but his feet continued to stomp to the cursed rhythm. Rajiv tried to run, but unseen hands grabbed him. His body, too, was pulled into the haunting revelry. His arms swung, his legs moved, but he was not in control. The laughter of the dead grew louder. The spirits spun around him, their faces morphing into nightmarish expressions, some weeping, some grinning, some with their mouths stretched unnaturally wide. Mira approached, her voice a whisper that echoed inside his head. "Play with us, Rajiv. Play, forever." He felt something cold and grainy in his hands. He looked down, his palms were filled with blackened holy powder. His fingers moved on their own, raising the cursed colors toward his face. A memory struck him, Pandit Dinanath's warning. The colors bring them back. Rajiv screamed and threw the powder into the air. A gust of wind roared through the village. The spirits froze mid-dance. Their heads snapped toward the sky, their hollow eyes widening in horror. A deafening screech erupted as the colors, once fallen, rose back into the air. The spirits convulsed violently, their bodies turning to dust. Mira let out a final, piercing wail before her form shattered into a cloud of ash. And then, silence. The festival had ended. Days later, Rajiv awoke in a hospital bed. Arjun was beside him, his face haunted but alive. They had been found unconscious at the entrance of Rangpur, the village completely deserted. The guest house, the temple, everything was gone, as if the village had never existed. But Rajiv knew the truth. Holi had been played in Rangpur once again. The curse had been lifted, or so he thought. As he reached for his bag, a small cloud of blackened powder slipped from his fingers. And in the distance, he swore he heard laughter.